fear of the unknown. They are afraid of new ideas. They're loaded with prejudices, not based upon anything in reality, but based on if something is new, I reject it immediately because it's frightening to me. What they do instead is just stay with the familiar. You know, to me, the most beautiful things in all the universe are the most mysterious.
One last question. Suppose, Lord Russell, this film were to be looked at by our descendants, like a Dead Sea Scroll in 1,000 years' time. What would you think it's worth telling that generation about the life you've lived and the lessons you've learned from it?
I should like to say two things. One intellectual and one moral. The intellectual thing I should want to say to them is this. When you are studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out. Never let yourself be diverted either by what you wish to believe or by what you think could have beneficent social effects if it were believed. But look only and solely at what are the facts. That is the intellectual thing that I should wish to say. The moral thing I should wish to say to them is very simple. I should say, love is wise, hatred is foolish. In this world, which is getting more and more closely interconnected, we have to learn to tolerate each other. We have to learn to put up with the fact that some people say things that we don't like. We can only live together in that way. And if we are to live together and not die together, we must learn a kind of charity and a kind of tolerance, which is absolutely vital to the continuation of human life on this planet.
In a resource-based economy where we base our production and distribution on physical reference, starting with the carrying capacity of the earth, where we streamline our labor expression towards things that have a long-term social return, when we get rid of the cancer known as the financial system and start to share our resources in a diligent way, working together, avoiding the false values of materialism and consumption pushed upon our culture, we find that we can provide a high quality of life for everyone on this planet while eliminating all of the central reasons for war, poverty, destitution, violence, criminal behavior, neuroses. It would be the dawn of a world we could actually label a civilization, and if that isn't a goal worth working towards, I don't know what is. Thank you.
Money is not scientific. It's made up. It no longer works as a positive force in society, instead dividing, blocking, and usurping human ingenuity that has been present since the absence of money as a motivational force. Tesla didn't do it for the money. Armstrong wasn't a radio genius since his teens because of the money. Galileo didn't do it for the money. Martin Luther King didn't do it for the money. If you're only doing it for the money, it's probably not worth doing to begin with.
Good evening. What you're listening to constitutes the opening periods of a show which will be broadly a retrospective of the 5 years in which the Zeitgeist Movement has been active. It is produced and hosted this week by everybody, and is for you. Now, such a retrospective must necessarily be at once a retelling of our journey as a group, but must include the wider world context. After all, the movement is a responsive gesture by those alive in its times to the pressures of our culture itself, and our solutions are those informed by the current and emerging state of technology. Founded in 2008 through the film Zeitgeist Addendum by Peter Joseph, TZM, as we came to call it, sought to engage the world's attention with the at once deadly byproducts of the culture we find ourselves inhabiting, and at once also the powerful prospects of what it termed a resource-based economy. This train of thought entailed a global set of attitudes and values towards a finite planet and the laws of nature, towards a diverse population divided through war, fear, and acquisitive pressures, yet so alike in their basic human needs and requirements. Above all, it nurtured the realization that the planet is a single systems-based organism, and as Carl Sagan had once put it, an organism at war with itself is doomed. As with many things, timing was a key factor. Zeitgeist Addendum, the successor to Zeitgeist the movie, which had hit the internet in 2007, was released on October the 2nd, 2008, just 3 days after the stock market crashed 777 points. As if to provide a massive live-action example of the critique of the economic system put forward in the film, the disastrous burst of the housing bubble, subprime mortgage lending, and other too-big-to-fail lending institutions going ahead and failing anyway, and in a too-big way at that, demonstrated on the news what the film had laid out on the screen. It provided an outstanding engine for public attention. The world watched then, as once again an already poorly maintained life support system and social spending was depredated and consumed by the self-preserving financial system. Since the beginning of TZM in 2008, ecological disasters of all kinds have been the ugly background noise to the increasingly vocal demands of a population which has begun to remember that while the environment can be destroyed by the violent invisible hand of the market, they are by necessity as people bound up with its fate as a system. The ultimate danger is not some specific bankers, policymakers, or politicians, but the underlying and unexpressed value assumptions which limit successful actions to creating profits and labeling everything spoiled, consumed, or polluted in the process of profit creation as an externality, something which doesn't even have a label on which one may mark $0. Now, nobody said it would be easy. And so it is with some comfort, I think, that we can reflect now that it wasn't. In fact, it's more obvious than ever on an anniversary that the last 5 years are only the first 5 years. A notable experience, well documented by freethinkers and meaningful social theorists in preceding generations, is that the questioning of established values and established practices, that unquestionable bedrock of a society, to question that is to demand derision and insult. We find ourselves back with the labels again, although this time it says outsider, and it's not offered, it's enforced and asserted. One wears it in spite of one's convictions. But we took heart, as every person in history has, because after all, it wouldn't be the system it is if it didn't put up a fight when you question it. It wouldn't have any power if there weren't the unmistakable coercion of its structures, its cleverly networked values and systems operating in concert to be everywhere and invisible. Culture itself. And the self-appointed guardians of the status quo came to know our names.
The first thing that I have up here, can you all see this? We got one guy over here, and then there's this group of people over here. Let me ask you some first impressions. What do you, when you look at this picture, with one person over here and 4 people over here, what do you think of this guy's situation? What's your first impression? Your first impression that he's lonely. Okay. He's outnumbered, right? What about you? Outsider. He's an outsider. Ostracized. Okay. I think we have a good general consensus. Okay, but he could also be one guy with a microphone talking to a bunch of people. True. You know? Maybe he's in charge and they're listening. But it's a good thing that you had that impression, because that's actually one of the major reasons that I brought that up, is that from a very young age, you're actually introduced to the first elements of how people control people. That's what this is about. This is actually not a resource-based economy specific presentation. This is relevant to all human beings. Anybody who wants to call themselves an activist or a critical thinker. Now, afraid for him, worried for him, He's off by himself. He's outnumbered. Okay. Now, how many times in your lives, and you don't need to answer this, obviously, have you ever been this person? Okay. Now, when you are this person, generally you're trying to think of how not to be that person anymore. You're kind of being pressured to go, man, I really want to be with these people. Okay, well, one of the reasons I brought this up is that society is engineered in such a way to use this as a weapon against you. First, let's talk a little bit about childhood social structures. My daughter recently started going to school, and I'm very particular about teachers. Like, I'm totally ready to homeschool if I have to. I've been lucky enough that the teachers have actually been really good. Like, I've been interviewing them. It's like, hey, what are you going to do about bullying? And I've been very happy. But there's still a bullying problem at school, and it's largely because my daughter, well, is my daughter. And I remember one day she wrote this little passage. She said, "You can't make me do the mean things." And she's like 6 at this point. I don't care what you think of me. I only want to be myself. Okay? And she's my daughter. But, you see, as you can imagine, somebody who's not susceptible to social pressures, doesn't care. Well, that kind of makes them a problem for the social order of first grade, or work when you're an adult, or any other social situation you're in. And so, one of the things that, it's actually kind of a phenomenon that's getting looked at more and more now, but it's called social aggression, where kids will, they've always done it, but it's starting to be looked at now that bullying is finally getting attention in the mainstream media, is that they'll get kids to stop talking to a certain kid, and then they'll get kids to even ignore a certain kid if they're not complying with the whole social scheme. Well, what do they ask of you? Let's move on a little bit more. Let's go into high school, okay? When you went to high school, you probably didn't think of it as an evil fascist organization there to control your every move. Wrong, okay? They control what you think. They control what you, like music you listen to. They control how you dress. They control who you associate with. They control who you don't associate with. And might I add, all of these things are not elements of the state. They are things that are created in the social situation by the people that are in it. The kids do this. They don't need police to come to your house and march in there and force their fascist ideas on you. They'll either psychologically attack you or they beat you up after school. Okay? Seriously think about that paradigm for just a moment. Think about how much control did the people in high school have over you and your conformity to their ideas.
The Zeitgeist Movement in its first phase had been primarily as the activism arm of the Venus Project, an organisation started by Jacques Fresco and Roxanne Meadows, which sought a global value shift through the showcasing of holistic city designs, technologically advanced manufacturing methods, advanced transport and agriculture, and architecture and design ordered and developed in order to maximise the technical efficiency and function of any aspect of human need and existential demands. Like Buckminster Fuller, a contemporary of Jacques, the world was a series of systems, much like the human body. Self-interest just doesn't factor into it when you're cohabiting with more than zero on a closed, finite planet and within a technical reality. Jacques had been on the Larry King Show in the 1970s for significant interview times, which thankfully live on today on YouTube and many other places. Jacques himself, now 97 and living in Venus, Florida, was propelled suddenly forward into a far broader and much more earnestly deserved audience. Peter Joseph launched a blog talk radio channel, the very one you're listening to now, in which over dozens of hours he answered questions from the general public and interspersed these with Q&As from Jacques and Roxanne. The Venus Project organised a tour around the world to meet the many diverse chapters of TZM, which had all begun springing up in an attempt to create a holographic structure which promoted the ideas and not the people spreading them. By 2010, the practice of an annual event day called Z-Day had become a global phenomenon, usually centering around the second week in March, which for 2010 meant the 13th, the Saturday, also fortuitously Jacques' birthday. Parallel events were organised around the world, culminating in a vast set of lectures and presentations which attempted a multi-pronged view of the ideas, structures and angles of a resource-based economy. Media attention began for these events, including coverage from the Huffington Post and the New York Times. Large venues sold out, and the view counts of the posted presentations on the internet began to grow. The world, meanwhile, continued to reel from the ever-widening default of the postmodern banking system. Market stalls to present the Zeitgeist ideas outside on the street were set up as early as 2008 and continue to this day in many of the big cities around the world, such as London and Vancouver. Europe's chapters in general featured in a pronounced way, partly because of the financial pressures, but mostly because of the lack of language barriers and locality of so many countries. Arguably, the absence of Fox News as a prominent media outlet didn't harm the cause too much either. From mainly Europe also arose, amid the teams of activists, a linguistics team, which staked its claim to the ambition of translating into as many languages as possible the various media produced by the presenters for a multilingual audience. The team, unwavering, finds itself doing this task 5 years on, with nothing but the most impressive dedication and output one could ever ask for. Why not look them up on Facebook or through Google? And why not offer your help? Or why not simply try out their handiwork and take in some of the subtitle-free material which they have put out? In 2011, after a great deal of build-up, Peter Joseph released Zeitgeist Moving Forward, which featured alongside Jacques and Roxanne from the Venus Project many thinkers and scientists whose work had informed the diagnosis of social pathology the movement was explaining. The movement was beginning to make use of a term coined by Professor John McMurtry of a cancer system. Professor McMurtry himself came on TZM Global to elaborate on this point.
Let me just go through the life sequence of value first. It's very simple and straightforward. And it's just basically you have a life host or you have a life structure, and or life means, but whatever form of life it is, it goes through means of life. It must have means of life. We must breathe every second, and we must have water and so forth. It must have means of life to become more life, that is, to continue as life and to, at best, biodiversify and become more intelligent at the human level. And so the life sequence is just life through means of life to more life, life through means of life at the best, not only to reproduction, but more flourishing life, more, and then I really get into what all that means, but we don't need to do that right now, but basically it's thought, action, and felt side of being, and it becomes more flourishing life. So we have life through means of life to more life, and that circuit reproduces itself forever. I mean, that's really, from the primitive protoplasm to now.
Right.
Now what we have is a money sequence that happens, it's happened really through civilized societies to some extent, that we've had this money sequence, and it's private, that is, it's only for private owners, and they turn money through life as means into more money for themselves to do it more money, returning to themselves to more money, to more money, to more money, and that becomes the money sequence of value. So you could have the exchange medium as we have in the ordinary, the market, the traditional market, where people, they're direct producers, sell their organic food and handicrafts, and it's the labor of those who own and sell it, and it's it's basically labor intensive, and it's local individuals with their personal knowledge and so on. And you have money that acts as an exchange medium between their product and someone's purchase of it for their own lives. At that point, money is not a problem. Money is actually very useful for people to convert what they can do into what others can do for them through an exchange medium. But what happens with the money sequence of value, it ceases to be an exchange medium for exchange of means of life for people to produce for one another and to have the means of life they require and have the means of exchange available to them. It changes into sheer money multiplication. It has no life function. It doesn't even, and the real cancer stage started happening when it no longer needed anything of concrete life value or anything of value at all as a middle term. It just turns, this is the derivative moment, it turns money into more money for private money possessors without doing anything, without providing any function. And of course that's gotten into the level of just Well, trillions and trillions of dollars a day are being manufactured in this way, where they have no committed function, they produce nothing whatsoever. So that's the money sequence that takes off as autonomous and exponentially multiplying, serves no function whatsoever, but is only evaluated on how much money it returns to its private possessors. And that's the only objective going. And that's called growth. And that's called profit returns. And that is affirmed even as it eats away the body of the society.
McMurtry's book, The Cancer Stage of Capitalism, which had been published by Pluto Press in 1999, received such renewed and widespread attention that in 2013 a second revised edition was released. The acknowledgements section thanks Peter Joseph directly. The second edition is largely down to the traffic driven to this work by the movement, and as such we should be proud that we can actively influence the bookshelves of those wishing to find out about what really governs the social structure. Even better, the book was now finally available in an e-book format. The ideas of McMurtry are now slightly more portable. By this time, we had seen a larger participation of people in speaking and public engagement. Brandy Hume rose to prominence with the Venus Project Challenge, a set of basic stipulations about a correct critique of the ideas of a resource-based economy, presented in a simple video. It served to enliven the debate whilst maintaining a basic integrity to the arguments through the challenge itself. 2011 proved to be a key year for the movement in both positive as well as more challenging and difficult ways. It saw the split, the disassociation of the Venus Project from the Zeitgeist Movement, coming, unfortunately, right at the point when TZM was gaining some level of mainstream traction. On the 25th of March 2011, Peter had appeared on Russia Today, with a follow-up interview aired in April. Since then, Peter, Matt Berkowitz from the Vancouver chapter, and Federico Pistono from the Italian chapter have all been interviewed on the same station, along with Gabor Mate, John McMurtry and John Perkins, who had all contributed to Zeitgeist's both addendum and moving forward. Federico even wrote a book on the oft-talked-about issue of technological unemployment, which, following recent publications by Andrew McAfee and Martin Ford on the same subject, each coming from a slightly different angle, made a good deal of noise and allowed the creation of a book which brought some wider social contexts in that are often missed in more economics-focused works.
Are robots on the verge of stealing our jobs? Think about it. If your job solely depends on driving, for example, what happens when this Google driverless car permeates the market? It's built to be safer, more efficient, and more convenient than any human driver. But this is just one predicament of thousands that will undoubtedly arise as more and more companies start embracing the tech industry, thereby eliminating the need for human labor. So should we just expect massive unemployment moving forward? Or is there room for people to work with this trend instead of against it? Earlier, I spoke with Federico Pistono, author of the book, Robots Will Steal Your Job, But That's Okay, How to Survive the Economic Collapse and Be Happy. I first asked him why the working class population shouldn't be afraid of the notion that technology can and will replace them. And here's what he had to say.
If the status quo is kept as it is, so we just go with inertia, it's going to be actually pretty catastrophic, especially for the middle class and the lower middle class. But eventually for all, because in a very unbalanced economy, society benefits only when everybody benefits. I think a combination of what I call the 3Ds, digitize, democratize, and distribute. So promoting and participating in the open source culture, the one where we make the knowledge, the sum of all human knowledge available everywhere in any language, the designs, right now we are digitizing not just culture and information technology, but we are digitizing things. In a few years, we'll be able to print circuit boards and devices. Actually, we're already starting. We can print all sorts of things. We can print wood, metal, ceramic, biopolymers, all sorts of things with micrometer precision with 3D printers that now cost a few $1,000s, and in a few years, they will cost pennies, well, not pennies, but let's say $100 or $200, and those technologies will be open source, which means they will be available to all, but this is not a given. This is a possibility. So already right now, they're trying to put DRM, digital rights management. It's sort of a lock to prevent you from having the freedom to do the things you need, such as printing the parts that you need or sharing information. with other people that allow you to, for instance, the things that we need, such as water, food, energy, shelter, material objects that we need, education, all of those things are becoming cheaper and more available, and in most cases free and open, but there is a strong push from the establishment to keep these technologies and this knowledge from being available to everybody.
Yeah, but what about
what I hope
3D printing of a gun? I mean, do you think there should be no regulation on things like that?
I mean, it's becoming obvious that the world is going to become a place where anybody can have anything. So what I think we should be doing, instead of thinking of monetary solutions or legislations to prevent people from doing X or Y, we should be promoting a different value system where open source, where collaboration, where empathy, where good values are actually rewarded in society. Because you can't prevent somebody from printing a gun. It's technically impossible. So what you can do is you can work in the substrate of society by promoting good values so that people don't want to print a gun and kill somebody, because where I come from in Italy, it wouldn't make sense to do that because it will be abhorrent, like people will be repulsed just by the idea and the notion of doing that.
Sure.
So you have to work at a very deep level, and one way is to promote resilience, sustainability, collaboration, sharing of information, of knowledge, and
sure, but Federico, the world is a very different place right now. I agree that that's an amazing, it's a beautiful vision to look toward. But right now, society is dependent on waste-driven things and pretty much destructive things for humanity. I mean, we're having all the smartest people working on death and destruction. Why are we doing this? I mean, why is humanity so focused on these things when the technologies that you're talking about are available? We had cars that could run on water decades ago. So what is going on here?
Well, to properly answer the question, I would require more than a couple of minutes. But you know, it's all part of a giant system of feedback loops, and it's very, you know, they're all entangled. It's very hard to exactly pinpoint the reasons. But what I think you could sum up with is you get what you reward. So we wanted more productivity because we thought that material wealth allowed us to accrue more things, and that gave us a good standard of living, which it did, and it was very efficient. That's why the capitalist system won over basically every other societal system on the planet. But now we're seeing the shortcomings of this system. So what I think we should be doing is, what do we do next? And in the book that I wrote, this one, which, by the way, is also available for free, because I think we should be leading by example, so you can read it for free on the website, we should be promoting the things that take away the power from the corporations and the governments that accrue power. So if you design things to last and you make the designs open source, then you can provide for the things you need, because you can make them yourself with very little money or even no money. Because just imagine the energy that you need to run the 3D printer. It can be it could be coming from solar energy, which you printed, which is, I mean, both the photovoltaic panel and the supercapacitor or the storage. In a few years, you can 3D print them.
Okay,
and
sure. So open source.
And all of these. So you print them. You make them to last, so that you don't need to keep constantly replenishing and buying new stuff, because you make it yourself. So why would you do something that breaks in 2 years?
Okay,
I mean, that's just because.
Sure, but once again, you're talking about the next step here. Right now, we're seeing governments seize on the surveillance technology. Privacy is basically eliminated. It's becoming a profit-making industry. I mean, the surveillance state is profiting off the government control in this, you know, the fishbowl that we're living in, Federico. How do we achieve that next step? I mean, and where does privacy fit into your end vision? Because you've said that the future will either be beautiful beyond imagination or dismayingly horrifying, much worse than sci-fi dystopias have prepared us for. How do we get to the former, not the latter here?
So one is you take the power out of the center of powers right now, corporations and governments. And one way to do that is to promote open source projects, to spread your knowledge as much as possible, to support open source projects, and organizations such as the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a non-profit where lawyers work pro bono to protect our privacy and our rights online.
That was Federico Pistono, social entrepreneur and author of Robots Will Steal Your Job, but That's Okay. And there's much more ahead on tonight's show. After the break,
Indeed, after the organizations of the Venus Project and TZM had begun moving in their separate, though parallel, directions, Jacques and Roxanne both also appeared on RT. To garner mainstream interest of any kind is the least likely success when our focus is such a radical and far-reaching one. Every time you see any mainstream representation of our direction, presented in a fair or balanced way, you are witnessing the sparks of truth admitted against interest. It wasn't just the news media which engaged in interactions with the tenets and efforts of the movement. We have assembled a list of quietly acknowledged celebrity support in the last few years. As early as 2010, we saw the release of an album by the Lost Children of Babylon called Zeitgeist, Spirit of the Age, and Mukaleba by Natasha Atlas, the multi-million album-selling Arabic Western fusion singer, whose album was filled front to back with clips of Peter and Jacques speaking on ZM Global. 2011 also featured, on September 11th, the first inaugural Zeitgeist Media Festival. This one-day festival, held in Los Angeles and with sympathetic events around the world, like with Z-Day, sought to bring together like-minded artists in order to communicate socially conscious values through the medium of the emotional experiences that are bound up with the performance and the arts. The year 2011 featured Lost Children of Babylon and Natasha Atlas, as well as renowned violin virtuoso Lily Hayden. Since then, Rutger Hauer, James Cromwell, Master Zero, Lillian's Rose, and dozens more have all joined in as well. But September of 2011 became the cornerstone month for something much larger, another parallel movement, which operated without leaders, and which grabbed the headlines more than anything else in the next 5 months. Occupy Wall Street.
Dear Americans, this July 4th, dream of insurrection against corporate rule. Occupy Wall Street. In mid-July, Counterculture magazine Adbusters follows its tweet with a call to action. Occupy Wall Street, September 17th. Bring tent. Anonymous throws its support behind Occupy, and the movement's momentum takes off via social media. Citizens travel from across the country to meet up with activists in New York, as Mayor Michael Bloomberg prepares for a protest. 2,000 protesters descend on Lower Manhattan. The New York City Police Department blocks Wall Street, and the protesters move to Zuccotti Park, where a culture of consensus takes root. Protesters camp for the night, and then for the week. Little does anyone know, the occupation is just beginning. Protesters received scant media coverage during the first week, but a few cans of pepper spray, an army of citizen journalists, and close to 1,000 arrests are about to change everything.
We saw in the video you being sort of surrounded and just sprayed in the face.
Wall Street and the critique of Wall Street and Occupy Wall Street movement for me is a matter of life and death. I was arrested twice. Police dragged us Harlem, 125th Street and 7th Avenue, as well as in front of Goldman Sachs. We put Goldman Sachs on trial, 6-hour trial, guilty. Why? Because I decided a long time ago I was going to be part of the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, Dorothy Day, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Gustavo Gutierrez, saying what? Engage in a fallible quest for unarmed truth, and the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak, so you look at the world through the lens of the weak and vulnerable. I don't care what color, what civilization, what sexual orientation, to try to get outside of yourself.
Occupy proved one thing above all else. The incumbent structure of banking and policing will rely on force, if not immediately, then ultimately. In UC Davis, a campus guard sprayed seated protesters repeatedly and fully with pepper spray. Occupy Oakland saw a great deal of violence and a shooting. By February 2012, through a series of raids, evictions and other measures, Occupy's physical encampments were killed off and shut down. The movement evolved into a more mental space, evolving just as TZM had done. Amid the closure of its protest sites, Occupy was vindicated, as a Bank of England official, Andy Haldane, admitted that the protesters had been morally and intellectually right. The public now had the thing which had been missing in their lives during the Arab Spring, to which Occupy had been a response in part, the evidence that their own social systems were not as harmless or easy to engage with as one might have imagined. Clearly there are large limits to the freedom of the press, of rights to assemble and rights to dissent. From this realization, it is perhaps only a small further step to an understanding that more systems than just police and law may be agents of aggression against the population. Jim Phillips, oftentimes host of ZM Global and the founder of the education side of our movement, has spent the last few years visiting dozens of schools to communicate the resource-based economy train of thought to youngsters. Recently, Jim revealed an interesting realization he had had to me. In the many presentations he had done for adults, he'd always been able to reply to any criticisms or questions with some kind of answer. It was only when he was questioned by children, after explaining systems-based living, that he would have to admit that he didn't know the answer to something he had been asked by one of them. It's the children, Jim said, that ask the questions they feel need asking, rather than the ones they feel they are allowed to ask. Here's Jim on the practice of coercive education and the structural violence implicit in state-based education to support the market model.
The first is that schools house people with less culturally indoctrinated mindsets that are more willing to take on new ideas. This potential openness a child has towards the notion that they really could radically change the world and make it a better place is not merely to be passed off as simple childish naivety. Children bring new eyes to old problems, and they don't have the same cultural baggage that many adults will have from years of having their aspirations for a better world beaten down. The real problem is, in my view, that many in the adult world have simply forgotten how to view the world through the eyes of a child. Wouldn't the definition of naivety, immaturity, selfishness, and irresponsibility be to think that you can have infinite growth on a finite planet? After all, this is what the adult world says makes sense, right? Then we have the audacity to lecture kids on how to behave. It's high time the adult world took a moment to pause and reflect on how they used to view the world when they were a child, and they'll quickly see it for what it is, a playground. And guess what? Playgrounds have to be looked after, otherwise playtime is over. And the second is that the educational system controls society and how it operates. Therefore, it's not really that surprising that most schools in this system are there largely to establish fixed habits of response to authority. They are the engine room for the creation of the mindset needed to fuel the system in which they exist. Our current system of coercive compulsory education's intrinsic design features reinforce obedience, docility, and act largely as a cookie-cutting plant to pump out an obedient population of work slaves ready for the marketplace. Through the use of coercion to create conformity to the prevailing status quo, the current educational system preserves itself largely by stifling independent, critical thinking skills. This is expected when you understand that culture reflects education and education reflects culture. They have to for the system to function at all.
I have a joke for the members of this movement. What does it say on the headstone of a dead RBE advocate? It says, "At least I fucking tried." Ladies and gentlemen, listening to the last half an hour or so of clips and highlights and historical elements gives a certain set of impressions to me that I wanted to close with. We have seen in a few short years a great many people realizing that the greatest value that we have on this planet and the necessary future we have to engage in is one that takes into account the way the planet functions itself. We cannot live in some intellectually boxed off area where our society functions in ways contrary to what nature can support and what the planet can offer. At the same time, we are boxing ourselves in intellectually and technically in very poor ways, resulting in a lot of the other issues that we see in the world, whether they are environmental degradation, pharmaceutical poisonings, and other kinds of greed distortions that burn themselves out and affect huge populations all at once. And were we only to reorientate our society through an increased understanding of the sciences, through a better method of thinking, the alignment with the scientific method and with everything that is required in order to construct the physical, technical reality that we have to survive in during our brief tenure on this planet. If we were to orientate ourselves in that direction, not only would we live lives that are literally sustainable with the planet, and therefore increased health, decreased danger, furthering social harmony, but we would also radically improve the quality of life as we have. The quality of life we have in the current system is not a high level of quality of life compared to what it can be, compared to what can be delivered by modern technology applied for social concern, not for profit. It is evident from 5 minutes checking on zeitnews.org, our own sister site, which all it does is aggregate that day's technological news. They write their own editorials as well, but the news comes in very much as it does on AP or anything else. These are syndications. And 5 minutes checking will show you the most amazing elements that are being discovered, the most incredible discoveries that will change everything about the way that we think about resources. And yet we find ourselves in the standard cultural baggage, the baggage that holds us down to the old folkways, to the pre-existing quarter, to the way that we mark up year after year, and we think of profits in quarters and times and weeks, and we watch this giant stock market that is the inversion of something that would indicate life quality itself. The higher the stock market goes, the more risk there is to almost everybody. It should be a marker of danger. It is the real terror alert warning system of the United States, in fact. It just hasn't been labeled as such yet. These are all the realizations we have now, and they do, in part, also give a clue as to how the last 5 years have gone and where the next 5 or 10 or 15 may take us. And that is that, of course, it's hard to have these conversations. You will get very little back from anybody who is winning in the current system. Partly that's just the plain old self-preservation drive kicking in. But partly it's also the way that humanity has evolved. We've evolved to become used to our situation, so we aren't scared to death of chairs and tables or concepts. And those concepts, when they become poisonous, need to be flagged up early, like the Paul Revere moment in the American Revolution. It's worth fighting for. It has been worth fighting for, and it's been a great honor so far to have had some small part in doing so. But the real success of this movement is the success of the ideas that they have. It's the promulgation, the delivery of those ideas on into the other systems through other groups of human beings that may not normally think about this stuff or may have very different attitudes to this. It is the success of those ideas only, and the ways that they affect the culture that comes after it, or that is informed along with it, that is the true measure of success. Occupy, Zeitgeist, Anonymous, UK Uncut, all of these movements are in fact one giant movement. They are all the great effort of life capital against industrial and finance capital. We'll return in a week or two with our regular programming, but now I want to thank you all for my brief retrospective. I hope not too through the tinted glasses of recent history. And to ask you all to soldier on the way you always do, the way you have done, in the way that makes it a wonderful adventure to visit a new city, knowing that I have friends I have never met who will let me sleep on their couch, hopefully for free. Isn't that the point, guys? And watching just the amazing media that's come out, whether it be artistic, whether it be social education media, whether it be things like Occupy that come from elsewhere, that are informed by the same pressures as our movement, and which give rise